Hey everyone, welcome back to a Geek's Garage. We're actually in a Geek's basement again today. It's unseasonably cold now here in Rochester, so I've decided that I'm going to do some of this work today down here in the basement. So what are we going to do today? Well, exciting news, we're finally going to start putting this car back together. Most of the parts I've needed are in. Almost all, if not all the parts that I think I need are in for the lower half of the engine. So we're going to actually start working on reassembling some of this stuff. And with that, I want to put out a disclaimer right now. If you're new to watching these videos or you stumbled across this because the description said assembling pistons or reassembling an engine, and you're looking for the right way to do things, stop. Go find somebody else's video. I have no idea what I'm doing. Everything that I'm doing here, I learned from watching other people's YouTube videos. This is my first engine assembly, and I take no responsibility for any damage that you might do to your own vehicle by watching my videos. So just thought I'd throw that out there. I don't want anyone thinking that I'm an expert in doing this. This is just a journal of me trying to go through and learn how to do these things. Who knows? Come back in 10 years and maybe I'll be an expert in rebuilding engines. But for now, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm making this up as I go along, watching a lot of YouTube videos. Thank you to all the different people who are out there who've put together videos that actually explain how to do some of this stuff. I'm going to explain what I've found, what I've learned from watching some of those videos, as well as reading up on a bunch of documentation. And that's what you're going to see me doing here. So with all that being said, couple things that I learned right off the bat when I started getting the engine worked on. So as you may know, I've completely torn down the engine and I sent it off to a machine shop to get honed and cleaned up and everything kind of reset and ready to go again. The car has 120,000 miles on it, so I'm doing a complete engine rebuild on this thing. As part of that, I went out and I bought Wiseco forged pistons, and I also got Maxpeedingrods connecting rods. And so what I'm going to be doing today is assembling these different pieces and putting everything together. One of the things that I found out that I did not know before I started this is there are rings that will come with your pistons, and those rings have a gap in them. So for example, we'll take the oiler ring here, and we'll be putting these together in a little while, but I want to show this first because this was not something I was aware of. If we won't take those, we'll instead take one of these. So this is one of the rings that's going to go around the piston, and we'll see whether or not you can see this here. You'll notice that there's a gap in there. That gap is actually dictated by Wiseco, and they send along instructions. When they, inside the box, they send along this nice set of instructions. Part of those instructions actually talk about how you need to have a very specific gap in the rings. Now what I can tell you is that that gap that's in there is not the gap these started out with. When I took these to the machine shop, the gentleman who did all the work for me said, "Oh, do you want me to gap your rings for you?" And I said, "Yeah, sure. I don't know how to do it." So if you're like myself and you're just starting out, you're trying to work on these things, and you are taking your block or anything to a machine shop, make sure you take along the rings and the pistons with you as well. They'll need the pistons in order to make sure that they're going through and boring the engine out properly, but they also have the ability to set this gap right, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that I could not have set this gap right without a special gapping tool, which I didn't have to buy because they did it for me. So just something to be aware of. So what are we going to be doing today? We are going to be taking and mating these two pieces together. And if the internet didn't lie to me, there's not going to be too many tools that are required for this. So this is one of my rods. we're going to go ahead and we're going to be attaching it through here using this wrist pin. And these clips, which will be used to actually retain the pin when we put it in. The pin will go through here, goes through here, and then those pins will seat in here. Biggest thing that you need for this, engine assembly lube. This stuff is, I'm told, really good as far as putting these things together, and because the engine rebuild process is going to take some time, what I'm going to do is I want to make sure that everything has a really good coating of lube in it so that when the engine first starts up, every part doesn't get damaged, because there's not going to really be any oil inside the engine circulating around. So what are we going to need to put this together? Just what I've shown you. The assembly lube, some cleaner, because we're going to go through and kind of clean everything up a little bit. I have a couple rags for the Maxpeedingrods. Specifically, I also have a 12 millimeter wrench, because one of the other things that I read about was when you go to start putting these things together, you want to make sure that both of the bolts, which hold the bottom half of your rod on, are loose. And if they're not, if they're cranked down really tight, then you're going to want to make sure that you back them out and loosen them up ahead of time, so that you're not trying to do that when everything's fully assembled. And the reason for that is depending on how tight that they're put in there, you may need to actually put it into some type of vise in order to break these free. Luckily, it seems like the Maxpeedingrods bolts are not in there very tight, but I do have a vise over here if I need it. The big thing will be, if I decide to use that, I'm going to want to make sure that I put wood on both sides of the jaw, so that we don't end up doing any damage to this, because the wood won't scratch it up or anything like that. That being said, I don't think I'm going to need to do that. So with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started. So these Maxpeedingrods, they come wrapped in some kind of like waxy paper. I'm assuming it's to keep them from getting rusted or dinged up or anything along those lines. But what I'm going to do right now is go through every piece of instruction I've read says go through and clean them first. So I'm going to go ahead and just use some shop non-chlorinated multi-purpose solvent, sprayed onto a rag, and just kind of wipe everything down and make sure that that waxy residue is off of here. We're going to do these one at a time, so I'm not going to open up a bunch of them yet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to attempt to install one of the retaining rings into the groove. So, first lesson is that the people on the internet make this look a lot easier than it really is. So, one of the things you don't want to do is scratch this thing up as you're putting it in, and they've got sharp edges on the edge. And what I've been finding as I'm trying to put this thing in here is I can get it about 3/4 of the way in, and then I'm not able to push it the rest of the way in. So, you know, at first I thought, well, maybe we just use a screwdriver, but again, we don't want to scratch this. So what I grabbed, and we're going to see if it works, is a set of, I have a complete set of plastic tools for popping out trim in a car. So my hope is that I can use this to push on the end and get the thing snapped into place where I want it, and it certainly isn't going to scratch up any of the aluminum. So hopefully this is going to work, and if this tool doesn't, then I've also got this one that might have a little bit more pushing power on it. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to give that a try. and see if I can come up with a method that works to get this thing in here. One other thing that I'm going to be doing, and I did a bunch of research to try and see if I could find out if there was a better way to do this or if there was a specific way to do it. But basically, the connecting rods, they've got a chamfer here and here. Since the chamfer on these seems to be the same, they appear to be multi-directional, which means that they could probably go on either way. I know that there are some rods out there that will only have a chamfer on one side and not the other, and those ones, it does matter which way you put them on. So these should be either way. The one thing I am going to do, though, just for uniformity, is there is a small divot, and it's marked with FWD. And on all of them, I'm going to go ahead and put the label facing in the same direction as FWD, just so that they're all uniformly put together. Okay, so we got one of the clips in, and I didn't like the way it looked, so I went and double-checked a few things. I went back, took a look at some notes, and also checked some video. And it turns out that I didn't quite install the clip right. What I found was after I put the clip in, I didn't like the way it was oriented. I did a quick search to see whether or not I was correct, and as it turns out, I had put the clip in wrong. It probably wouldn't have been a huge deal. This is not going to be a super high horsepower motor, but I want to try and do things right. So what I had done wrong was the gap in the clip was lined up directly with the small cutout in the side of the piston. We'll put a video right here that'll actually show exactly what I'm talking about. So the first time around when I got the clip in, it was basically sitting like this, and you'll notice that the edge or the gap is sitting right where that indent is, and that was not going to work. It could barely get it out. So I took it back out, and the way that it should be going in is like this, with the gap facing up, and basically the wire going past that gap so that it can be popped out later on. You can actually put it in with the gap facing 180 degrees in the opposite direction, so facing directly down. And when I finally finished the assembly of these, I ended up with one ring on one side pointing up and the other pointing directly down, just because that was the easiest way to get them in. One thing that I'm going to suggest, in addition to the other tools that I've talked about using before, I'm going to add on there a pair of safety glasses. Because when this clip popped out, it went flying out right past my head, and luckily it didn't hit me, especially it didn't hit me in the eyes. So I'm going to be wearing a pair of safety glasses when I'm doing the rest of these, because I'm also going to go through and apply some assembly lube, so this thing's going to get a little bit more slippery as I work with it, and I don't want to lose an eye. So highly suggest, if you're doing this, a pair of safety goggles. Let's try this again. Alright, so it's working, or I got one working, or put together, and maybe I have a process for this. We're going to try another one and see if it works, and then if it does, I'll show what I've been doing to get it to work. So, let's see. So, I think I have a process for doing this. I'm going to go get another camera and set that up and try and record this close up. So we'll start by just getting all the parts out and arranged, so I've got everything easy to get to. So the first thing, once I've got all the parts out, is we're going to put in one side, or one of the circlips on one side. And the way that I found seems to work best is to basically push it straight down in and then give it a little tilt, kind of like you can see here. So by pushing it straight down in, it's easier to put in there, and then with the tilt, you're in pretty good shape. And at this point, I need to hire a professional cameraman, because apparently I can't keep things in frame right. But basically what we're going to do is take the wrist pin, put it in through the opposite side, and basically push down on it. And as you push in, you'll actually hear a click, and that's actually the circ pin popping into the gap that it needs to be in. And then you can just use a plastic tool to pop the other part of it in, so that it's fully seated in there as it's shown here. Now, using the engine assembly lube, get that stuff all over everything, really, just to make sure everything is lubed up. And then we're going to go ahead and put the wrist pin in. And you'll notice I'm struggling here. That's because I'm trying to push it in from the side that I just put the circ clip in. So pay attention to what you're doing, and make sure that when you go to put the wrist pin in, you're putting it in from the right side. The wrist pin should slide in very easily. If it doesn't, you might have a problem. But now that the wrist pin is in, you can see that I've oriented, as I mentioned before, where I'm using that little dot that says SWD, and putting that to the same side as the writing on the connecting rod. And now what I'm going to go ahead and do is put the other circ pin in on the other side. So this one I'm going to orient down. And again, as I explained earlier, whether it's oriented up or down, as long as it's not caught in that, or the gap isn't set to that same spot for being able to take the circ pin out, you should be in good shape. I found that the second one was a lot harder to do, but a little bit of persistence, pushing it down, and again using that plastic tool to push and snap it into place really seemed to work out well. And there we have it, a fully assembled piston and connecting rod. Just as easy as everybody else on the internet makes it look. Alright, so that's how I'm doing these things. We're 50% down. Let's go ahead and get the rest of these things assembled. Cue time lapse. Alright, so that's that. All 6 pistons have been assembled. I still need to put the rings on. The rings will be in the next video. But with that being said, you know, quite frankly, this took me probably about 3 or 4 hours to do. There are some tools out there for putting those circ clips in. If you've got the time and an extra 40 or 50 bucks, you might want to try buying one, because, man, I'm telling you, My thumbs are extremely sore from pushing those things in, hitting edges. It is just really rough. I did try wearing gloves at one point, but then I had no dexterity at all, and the clips were flying everywhere, and I didn't record that part. So, highly suggest setting aside a couple hours for this. Certainly, if you're skilled at doing this, you probably would have been done in an hour or less. But that's basically going to be it. Stay tuned. Hopefully, another video in another week or so. I'll be putting the piston rings on, getting that all set up, and then we can really start putting together the lower half of this engine. So make sure that you like this video. Please place comments below. I read all the comments. I try and respond to most of them. I really appreciate any comments you give me. Definitely make sure that you like, and if you're enjoying this, be sure to subscribe so that you get a notification when new videos come out. And with that, see ya.